What's going on, everybody? Welcome to the Backpacking Podcast. As always, John Kelly here with Jeremiah Stringer. And we are here today again at the beautiful Monos Coffee Crafters here in Nicholasville, Kentucky. And Jeremiah, we had a conversation going in our last episode. We're just going to dive right in today. Usually we do a lot of small talk, but I want to dive right in because we left off on some good stuff. We got done talking about warm weather or cold weather clothing and keeping warm. Well, today we're going to move from clothing now over to the gear that you need to bring to stay warm in cold weather. I'm going to start off talking about shelters.
Oh, interesting.
And so what I want to talk about is I want to talk about the difference between a single wall shelter and a double wall shelter when you're backpacking in the wintertime, and why I believe double wall is the way to go.
All right. I'll tell you about my tarping experience.
That sounds good.
Okay, go ahead.
So this is kind of the way I see things. Now, this is not the gospel. This is not like something you have to do because I believe this, but this is what I think. Double wall tents seem to do a better job in cold weather of keeping moisture off of you, because condensation in the wintertime is going to happen because the outer wall of your tent or your hammock, your tarp, whatever, is getting cold.
Yeah.
And the breath coming out of your body is not cold.
No, and it has moisture in it.
And the two of those are going to come together. And if you don't have yourself in the right kind of shelter, you're going to get rained on or slightly snowed on throughout the night.
Dude, I've woken up with my tent, my breath makes ice above my head.
Yes.
And then it sprinkles down and it wakes you up at night because you got your sleeping bag on you, you're all nice and warm, and then you just get little droplets on your face of this little snow inside your tent. You're like, what the heck? And then about an hour later, you'll get another one. Another one.
So here's my thoughts on that. Double wall is definitely the way to go because of the fact that condensation is getting on the outer layer of your tent or even in a hammock. I wear a bug net. I use a bug net in the wintertime in a hammock. I don't use a winter cover because a winter cover is just going to build up all that condensation on the inside of your hammock, and that's a lot closer to your face than a tent. And I don't want that stuff on my face. And I don't want that condensation near me. So for me, having that bug net or the inner to let that condensation get out and attach itself to the outer part of your, whether it's a hammock or a tent, being on the tarp or being on the outer part of your tent, to me is the wise way to do it.
Yeah.
Is a way to keep that off of you because, like we said, moisture is your enemy in the wintertime.
Yeah. And in case people don't know, like the double wall versus the single wall is almost self-explanatory. Single wall meaning like there's only one layer of the tent. Usually the multiple layers would be like you have your tent set up and it's a tent body. So like the top part is maybe mesh or like nylon with some mesh on there or something to vent it. And then on the outside, you put on like some kind of hard shell, like a rain cover or something like that.
Yeah. And so like your double wall tent, your standard tents that you're used to, where you set up the first part, like Jeremiah said, has the frame attached to it, and you put your mesh area up that lets all the air out, kind of keeps it breathable inside and all that kind of stuff. Then you put on the outside, which is basically in essence a tarp.
Yeah, it's like
it's
a rain
just
fly.
a stretchy tarp. A rain fly is what it's called. But then you put that on the outside, and I believe that being in one of those and being in a one-person shelter versus being in a two-person shelter also is wise in the wintertime because there's less room to have to heat up with your body heat.
Dude, I've seen videos of people where they talk about like the temperature outside versus inside the tent, and they'll actually show like inside the tent it's 6 degrees warmer or 12 degrees warmer or something like that. But you can literally feel it. Like you don't have to have the little thermometer with you.
Oh, yeah, you can feel it.
You go inside the tent, and if it is, well constructed and everything's tied on it and there's not wind and stuff getting in, then it'll be substantially warmer in there.
Absolutely.
I don't know if you're really supposed to do this, but this is something that one of Jason's buddies was talking to me about. He takes his gas stove and turns it on for like 2 minutes inside his tent, and that warms up the air inside his tent.
That's actually not a terrible idea.
I said, that is a great recipe for carbon monoxide poisoning, but it sounds really warm.
Well, Here's the thing, though. Here's the thing. If you're in the right kind of tent that has areas where it can vent out,
Yeah.
which you're going to want to vent out in the wintertime, too. People don't understand that. Just because you're in a tent, it's cold outside, doesn't mean you don't want the tent to still be able to vent.
Yeah, especially with the condensation.
Yeah, you want that to get out of the tent, if at all
Yeah,
possible. It's not all going to.
How are you supposed to vent it and get the condensation and the moisture out, but also keep the warm air trapped in there? How are you supposed to do that? I don't get it.
Yeah, it's just a question we have to figure out right now, Jeremiah.
All right, well, let's unpack.
We have to
it a little
answer.
bit.
Why don't you come up with the way we make this happen?
Well, I think first of all, like you don't want dead air in there, okay? But you also don't want like it so unvented or so vented that you're literally just getting wind sweeping through. So you have to have some kind of air movement.
Yes.
If you want it to be vented.
Right.
Right? But it's like a delicate balance. I think if you kind of make it analogous to, you want a slight, I wouldn't really say breeze, but just a little bit of airflow through there versus like, let me give you an example. So Scott, another one of Jason's buddies, we went on this Pine Mountain Scenic Trail around Thanksgiving time.
Mm-hmm.
And it was very, very windy. And one of the nights it was also fairly cold. So not only windy, but also cold. And he had this, we talked about it before. It's the Z-Pax tent that has the poles.
Oh yeah, it's basically the Duo, but it has
It's like a free Duo.
Yeah, the free Duo.
Is that what it's called?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, Z-Pax, you make great stuff, but in his opinion, the vestibule doors were not long enough. And what was happening was, I don't know if it's the angle that they come off or what, but it was so windy, the wind would go like straight up under it. And he also said they didn't overlap enough. I guess that they didn't have the kind of fitting that he liked.
That's about the only negative comment I hear about the duplex and the Altiplex and all of them is that they're not made. I think people misunderstand what they're made for. Like they're made for through hiking. That's what they're made for. They're made to be quick setup. They're not made for taking out on like extreme temperatures and things like. That's not what they're necessarily made for.
It's not a 4-season tent.
No, not in the least bit. And it's made so that it just weighs less. And so that's why they don't have zippers and things on the doors of their tents. They are made to overlap that way.
Well,
I could see where somebody would be frustrated with it in like high winds and cold and that kind of thing.
Like the mesh part that you crawl in the tent through has a zipper, but the vestibule doors, it's all
tension.
Yeah, it's all tension based, and you're like staking it down.
Right.
And it done fine in like these 30, 40 mile an hour winds.
Right.
But it was the wind was kind of cresting up under it. You don't want that to happen.
I'm looking in the video, and it looks like my leg is flattening out.
What?
So I got a phone in my pocket, and I got my AirPod Pros over here.
Part of the EDC.
So now my leg doesn't look like it's got like I've got a cancerous tumor on the side of it, like flopping out over here. It was like weird. I looked in the video. I'm like, man, what is wrong with my leg? And it was like this huge, like all this stuff. So, anyways, sorry. Keep going.
Oh, no worries.
Sorry for people who are listening online on the radio and they can't, or on their iPods or whatever, iPhones.
Yeah.
Do people even have iPods anymore?
I think they still sell them.
Do they really?
But I don't buy them.
I don't buy one.
So anyway, you got to find that balance between gentle airflow through there, I think, and I could be totally wrong. I hammock camp most of the time, for being honest. So,
well, and a lot of your tents, especially like your double layer tents, they have venting areas.
Yeah.
At the top, like the Sea to Summit tents that came out this last year, incredible tents. The Alto and the what's the one that you got?
It's called the Telos TR2.
Yeah, the Telos and the Alto were the two that came out. The Telos is the fully freestanding, and the other one's the semi freestanding. The Alto is, and they both have great venting options.
Yeah, it's got like a almost like a little hard suspension plastic piece that keeps the rainfly up so that the mesh part of your roof can be vented. Yeah, it's not touching.
And the thing about that's great is cold air drops, warm air lifts. And because it's at the top of the tent, that's why it doesn't bring cold air into the tent, because the warm air coming out is kind of pushing out more so than the cold air is pushing in, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
So it's nice the way it's set up with that vent, which helps reduce your condensation and keep fresh air kind of flowing through the tent without freezing the thing out.
Yeah. Yeah, you don't want a cold draft through there. So that's the tent, double wall versus single wall. Like I said, I've done the single wall before, but as you were saying, you might get a little snow in there.
Yeah.
Now, if you're doing hammock.
Now, if you're someone who just you want to live in a winter wonderland, and you love having that snow on you at night, maybe you go single wall so you can have that white Christmas kind of experience. Because I mean, Christmas was just this past week.
Yeah.
So I mean, you think about it. Some people maybe that's just what they want.
Well,
they're psychotic if they do, but that's that's what some people want.
It could be something else though. At the time, I think that I might only had one tent, and I was like, I'm getting out there, and I'm taking this tent, and that's what I got. So
hey, if that's what you got, you make the most of it.
Yeah.
But if you have a choice.
Yeah, if you have a choice.
What we're talking about is if you have the choice.
Yeah.
And the truth is, most people don't do single wall tents.
No, it's a very niche market, I think.
It is. It's mostly through hikers.
Yeah.
It really is, or ultralighters, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Most people, myself included. I mean, I don't typically. I have a couple single wall tents, but if I use a tent, I'm usually using a double wall tent.
Yeah, I sold my Six Moons design. That was a single wall. I have the Telos, but like I said, I mostly hammock camp, and like wintertime camping in the hammock, I really like it because I have a 0 degree underquilt. And
I don't know if you do, but do you find yourself sleeping warmer in a hammock than you do in a tent? I do.
Well, I know this is something we're going to talk about, but it depends on my sleeping pad. Like so I did a through hike of the Vermont Long Trail, and on that there were temperatures that were below freezing on some nights, and I was using the NeoAir X-Lite pad, and it has like a R value. They changed the R value system since I've done the through hike, I think.
Right.
So at the time, it was like maybe like a 3.7 or something. Now maybe it's like a 4.2.
Really?
I don't know if they changed how they.
The X-Therm or the X-Lite?
No, it wasn't the X-Therm. It's the X-Lite. Did I say X-Therm?
No, you didn't. No, just the 4.2 is awful high. I didn't think the X-Lite was that high.
Well, I could be totally off.
So
I'm just pulling these numbers out of my pocket here.
Hey, fair enough, man.
My back pocket.
Do what you got to do, bro.
So I don't know. Anyway, long story short, that yellow pad, the X-Lite, some nights I was cold. Even though I had a 15-degree sleeping bag, so, the warmth just gets sucked up from under you. But then I got the Nemo Tensor Alpine version.
Okay.
And the Alpine is like their winter version. So the X-Therm, I think, is one of the cheapest, highest R value, quality, not the most comfortable, but
definitely ultralight.
Yeah.
Less than a pound.
So if you're looking at like budget conscious and to check all the boxes, the X-Therm with that higher R value. But I never get cold on my Nemo Tensor.
Yeah.
So I think in the tent, if you have the right pad and the right sleeping gear, which we'll talk about here in just a second, I think I sleep warmer in the tent when it comes to like gear to weight ratio, if that makes sense. So like, for example, that pad weighs a pound, 20 ounces or something. I got the long wide version. Okay. And then you got your sleeping bag, or you could use your quilt, the same one that you would use in your hammock if you want. Okay. The tent. Now my tent setup is lighter than my tarp and hammock and all the sleeping gear that goes with it. So if I want to be warmer with less weight, my tent will be warmer with the right pad over my 0 degree underquilt.
Okay, keep talking. I'm going to look up some weights while you're talking about this.
So I have a 0 degree UGQ underquilt, and I absolutely love it. But one of the issues is it's way less compact than a rolled up sleeping pad.
Always.
And it weighs much more. I think it weighs like maybe 2 pounds, maybe 2.5 or something. It's more comfortable in the hammock.
Which pad are you using?
I'm using the Nemo Tensor Alpine. I think it's like 20 ounces maybe for the version that I got. Okay. I'm 6'3", like 220. So I always need the long wide of everything.
Right.
So I just think that like that pad, it's so compactable. Whenever I roll it up, it takes up like the size of a Nalgene water bottle. But I feel like my underquilt, I always have to get this giant backpack. Not giant, like we talked before about how I bought this new backpack, the 3400, the Hyperlight.
Right.
And that thing will just keep eating. But the underquilt takes up so much room. And I like the underquilt. It's more comfortable in the hammock. And it's just as warm, but I think I'm warmer in the tent in those super cold temperatures with the right pad, and it doesn't take up as much room as my backpack.
Okay, I'm looking at some things, and I think you might be all wrong on some of your weights.
Well, I told you I'm just making these numbers up. Facts are optional on this podcast.
And that's okay. So I'm looking at UGQ quilts right now.
0 degree.
0 degree.
900 feel.
Let me pull it up. So you said 0 degree.
And the longest you can get.
The 950 fill.
950 feel and whatever their wide, long underquilt.
Okay, so it's not 2 pounds.
Okay.
It's 28 ounces.
28 ounces.
Which is actually not heavy at all when it comes to a 0 degree.
Well, that is a cup half full perspective because that's only 4 ounces away from 2 pounds.
But I'm curious about the Nemo sleeping pad you're talking about.
The Tensor?
The Nemo Tensor Alpine, right?
Nemo Tensor Alpine version. The extra long,
extra wide.
Actually, I don't even know if it comes in an extra wide. They might all be 25
They have a wide.
inch.
It's a wide, yeah.
Okay. I believe it's 25 inches wide. Okay.
Going over to the Moose Jaw website because it was the first one that popped up.
Oh, look at that. They pay Google the most.
Yes, they do. Yes, they do.
To be put first in the marketing.
Okay, so there's only a 4 ounce difference between the two. This is 1 pound, 8 ounces. And that is, let me make sure it's the wide. That's the long wide. So you're looking at 24 ounces versus 28 ounces, which is only 4 ounces, which is like a quarter of a pound.
I know, but that's only one aspect of the equation.
I hear that.
Okay.
I hear that. But I'm just saying, like, it's really that's a negotiable weight. Like 4 ounces, 4 ounces is like a stove.
4 ounces, that's quite a bit of chocolate.
Fair enough. But I will say, like, it's not as much as it sounded like at first.
Yeah.
We were looking at a half a pound versus 4 ounces now.
Okay.
That is a huge difference.
Let's talk about the rest of the equation, though.
Let's talk about the rest of the equation.
Okay. So let's say those 4 ounces, and I know there's an ultralighter right now gritting their teeth. 4 ounces, this is a no-brainer on which decision you would make.
This just depends on how you want to sleep, buddy.
That's true. What is it? Pack light, freeze at night. Isn't that what they say?
Something like that.
So there is that. And this is just going to be a me problem, okay? We talked about my hammock before, the Pride of Kentucky. We talked about it very recently. Talked about getting a new hammock because mine is double layered. So I have a heavy hammock.
Yeah, your hammock is way heavier than the average hammock.
Yeah, but that's a me problem.
Right.
That's on me.
Right.
Okay? So if I were to switch to a different hammock, we're still talking about winter weights here. I'm carrying all the weights of my 2 puffy jackets, my heated blanket, or whatever, whatever gear I'm bringing. So all this is adding up. If I were to go with the single layer hammock, and I know that you might not be a fan of the winter zip-on cover instead of the bug net.
Yeah, I don't like the condensation issue.
Okay,
yeah.
but you know that they make those vented.
I know. Yes, they do.
But you're saying it's not enough vented.
But it's still right over your head.
So what, you want like a quarter mesh and the rest is winter shell?
Now that I wouldn't mind.
Okay.
Actually, I wouldn't mind that at all.
Maybe we just solved another backpack.
Maybe we just need to make something happen here.
Yeah.
UGQ, are you listening? Hey, Dream Hammock.
Do they even make the zip off? Somebody needs to.
Somebody needs to. I mean, I'm sure somebody makes this thing because it makes too much sense not to.
No, there are definitely companies that do you can switch from the mesh net.
Well, Dream Hammock does that with the Ravens. The Raven hammocks will let you do that.
Because that's what Jason had.
Yeah.
Right, and you can zip it off and zip on a winter.
Do you hear that sound in the background?
That sounds like some delicious coffee being made.
That's the sound of coffee being ground right now. It's a beautiful sound. It's a beautiful sound.
So,
but yeah, I would say for me, like, I don't want something that's directly above my face.
Yeah.
Where condensation is gonna get stuck above and just sit there.
Yeah, and then
gather overnight and then just eventually drip off.
Okay. So when you're talking weight, let's say I shed the double layered hammock.
Yep.
Go with the single layer. Like, for instance, the one that Jeremy made is 5.5 ounces.
Right.
But it has no net on top.
Right.
So not a big deal in the wintertime when it comes to bugs and snakes and stuff getting in your hammock.
Mm-hmm.
But you're losing a layer. And I don't know how much that layer actually matters.
It depends on what your top quilt is. I'm using a 0-degree top quilt. I don't really need
the top
cover.
layer. But you also get...
It might overheat me, actually.
Excuse me. Do you get condensation when it comes to getting on your top quilt?
Okay, we're going to talk about that in a second.
Okay.
We'll get that in a second. Let's get through the other stuff, and we're going to come back to that because I have a thing I do in the wintertime that is uncomfortable for a few minutes, then works itself out, and it's great the rest of the night.
Okay. So let me finish up about the hammock camping in the wintertime. Okay. The tarp. I like a tarp with doors, especially in the wintertime.
Absolutely.
Because that's going to help cut out some of the wind getting up under there.
Yep.
So pitch it the right way. I pitched my hammock. You mentioned perpendicular earlier. I pitched my hammock perpendicular to the wind.
So it doesn't blow in through the sides.
Yeah, that way it's not going under me like a tunnel. And my tarp just stopped the wind. So,
and I'm going to take that a step further. I always do it so that my foot end is closest to the tarp side that the wind's blowing against.
Wait a second.
So the reason I do that is because my head, the way I lay, is I lay left to right.
You do
in my hammock. So if the wind's blowing in, it's hitting my feet, not my face, when the tarp gets blown in towards me.
I'm not sure I'm comprehending.
You lay at a diagonal in your hammock, right?
I lay in a diagonal, yeah.
Okay,
in the pocket.
So whichever side your feet are on is closer to the tarp than your head is.
Your tarp isn't the same distance on each end?
Well, sure it is, but you're laying diagonally in your hammock. So you're not laying straight in your hammock, you're laying at an angle in your hammock.
Yes.
So I always try to make sure wherever the wind's hitting is on the side that's closer to my feet. So that if it's blowing, it's not smacking me in the head.
It's touching your
touching
feet?
my feet instead. And that has been a lifesaver on a few times for letting me sleep through wind. Because when that tarp's hitting me in the head, I'm not sleeping. If it hits me on the feet, I've got my feet, I've got booties, I've got a hammock over top of that. You know what I'm saying? Like, or not a hammock, a top quilt, all that. Yeah. My head, however, is sticking out, and it's just sitting there right next to the thing, and it's just smacking up against you. I've been able to sleep through wind because of that.
You ever had to get out and put a stick or something?
Oh, I've had to fix my tarp multiple times.
Yeah.
There's just sometimes you can't help it, especially if it's raining and it's windy.
Yeah.
Because sometimes your guy lines can get loose.
Yeah, they
of the
slip.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It happens in tents. It happens in hammocks. It doesn't matter what you're using. That just happens sometimes.
Yeah, true that. So I guess that's about it on my hammock situation. I don't know.
Let me throw out something I do that I stumbled on by accident, but it worked. And it's going to sound weird. And when I say it, there are going to be people who hate me, or not hate me, but they're just going to completely disagree, and you're allowed. It's America. And if you're listening in Europe, we're in America, so
it's allowed.
You get to be an American right now.
Yeah, by proxy.
So, yes, by proxy, because you're listening to us. So what I do when it's really cold is I get inside my hammock and let that warm up really good. Then I pull my hammock, my top quilt, and I pull the top quilt over my head. And because it's already warm, the air's already warm in there, I don't get condensation on the inside of the top quilt. But if I throw the top quilt over my head when I first start, because it's cold inside the top quilt, I get all kinds of condensation. But if you wait just a little bit, let it warm up with your body heat, and you put it over your head, the air's already warm in the top quilt. You don't have to worry about a ton of condensation getting on the inside of your hammock or your top quilt. Why do I keep calling a top quilt a hammock?
I don't know. They work together perfectly.
They do help each other out. But I found when I do that, I don't get a ton of condensation on the inside of my sleeping bag or my top quilt, and I don't need a top cover because of it.
So you're saying that you always cover your head with your top quilt?
When it's really cold.
Okay.
When it's really cold, like, because it's a 0 degree. I'm not going to cover my head like when it's 40 degrees out.
Yeah, you'd be burning up.
But like when it's, say, like the teens or lower, I'll lay there for a while. My nose will get real cold while I'm sitting there. But then once I feel like it's nice and warm inside of there, I'll pull that thing right over my head. And I don't have to, I really don't worry about condensation the rest of the night.
Yeah, I usually don't even think about it. If I'm real cold, I just pull it over me. But I was talking about condensation on the outside of your top quilt. Because Jason Mr. Backpacking with Jason, sir. Put some respect on his name.
Respect. RESPECT.
That's right. What he does is takes like a cheap Costco, don't even have a temperature rating. It's just a cheapy, puffy top quilt you can throw over you. And he throws that over the top of like his 10-degree top quilt.
Yeah.
And because I get condensation, I guess it's trapped under my tarp. The more I talk about this stuff, the more I backpack, the more I realize I have no idea.
Well, here's the thing.
How I'm using my gear.
That's where pulling it over my head solves some of that problem.
So
because I'm not going to have condensation because I'm underneath the warm.
Yeah, but the moisture's got to go
top quilt.
somewhere. The moisture has to go somewhere, right? So I imagine what's happening is if I'm just laying there and I got my top quilt over me, but my head's not covered.
Yeah.
Okay, and I breathe out. What's happening is there's moisture in my breath. It's going out in the air, and then I don't know. I guess it's the cold is forcing it to condense into water vapor, and that's settling on the top quilt. And then whenever I rub it, you're rubbing all that liquid together, and it gets you wet.
Yeah.
I assume that's what's happening.
That's probably, and I think he uses a top cover, doesn't he, in the cold weather?
He uses the top cover too, yeah. So that's
The
probably
top cover,
trapping even more.
The top cover is probably why he's getting so much moisture in
But
there.
I get it without the top cover.
You get it on your top quilt?
I get it on the outside of my top quilt, especially around my head area.
Really? See, now, I do if I don't cover my face up.
So
But
you cover your face up, where's the moisture go? Does it
I
just
don't
evaporate?
Know. I don't know. Like, maybe it's the warmth keeps it from staying wet. I don't know. Because you know how, like I said earlier, you put wet socks
Yeah.
in your sleeping bag with you at night.
It's got to evaporate, right?
It dries, but the inside of your sleeping bag's not soaked.
Yeah.
So I don't know what to say. I know it works. That's all I know.
Well, as long as it works, I guess the physics.
I mean, we've already talked about the witchcraft that's involved in backpacking to begin with.
It's
So
backpacking voodoo.
this is backpacking voodoo. But no, in all seriousness, like if you sleep with wet stuff in your hammock or your tent with you, and it's inside your sleeping bag or your quilt, it dries out, but you don't have a soaking wet quilt from that.
I know, but I can only
Your legs
assume-
aren't. Something has to happen.
Well, your body heat obviously is warming the fluid, and it's got to be evaporating. But
So I'm wondering if it's the same thing when I'm doing that with my. Because the first time I did that with my top quilt, I just put it over my head right away. Well, it hadn't warmed up yet. So the moment I did it, was this cold top quilt with this warm breath, it immediately got soaked. Like it just got wet and it was gross. And I never did it again. Then one day it was too cold. I was laying there trying to stay warm. It was just too cold.
yeah.
So I pulled it up over. The next day it wasn't wet. And so I just started letting it warm up first and then pulling it over. I never had a problem. So now granted, I am not someone who winter backpacks, 20 times a year or something.
Yeah,
But
it's not like we're Shug, Emery.
yeah, or Miyagi or any of those guys from Minnesota.
Yeah,
We just, when I do go out, that's what I do, and it seems to work.
yeah.
So that's all I can give you. That's all I got on that.
So I mentioned on the tent, like using my pad. Can we talk about pads for a second?
Dude, we can talk about pads for more than a second. We got like at least 5 minutes.
Okay. So I started out with a non-insulated pad whatsoever. All right. My first backpacking trip, I started with no pad.
Oh,
What I started with was, I don't remember if I told you
a
this.
hope and a dream.
I mean,
That's what you started with.
yeah. If you've heard this before, I'm sorry. John, I probably told you before, but you've probably forgotten.
It's okay, Yosemite Sam. Tell me your story.
So my first backpacking trip, we were going to the Smokies, and I'd never been backpacking before. I just watched some YouTube videos and stuff to get some preliminaries on gear to borrow from people.
Right.
And so I borrowed a hammock, an Eno, from one of my buddies that I knew.
That's Eagle Nest Outdoors for people who are curious.
I didn't know that.
I'm pretty
Eagle
sure.
Nest
I think
Outdoors.
it's Eagle Nest Outdoors.
Well, the Eno, they're fine if you're like in college and you want to throw it up between two trees and read a book or whatever. But I was going to the Smokies, and even in we were going in May or June, I believe. Even in those months, still at night, it got in the 50s, I think. So I didn't have an underquilt. I bought a yoga mat.
Eagle Nest Outfitters.
Eagle Nest Outfitters. Thank you.
There you go.
I bought a yoga mat as my pad to insulate me in the hammock.
So it was heavy, and it was worthless.
Well, we got a hotel, and one of the people of our party was staying at the hotel while all the guys went on this backpacking trip, and then she was supposed to pick us up. It was the wife of one of the people.
Yeah.
And she was going to shop and do some touristy stuff. And so I was able to kind of pick and choose what I wanted to leave at the hotel.
Yeah.
And so the night before, I looked at the guidelines, and it was like, oh, you're not supposed to hammock camp in the Smokies. You had to sleep in the shelters. Like, you're literally reserving spots inside the shelters in the Smokies.
Depending on where you are. Yeah. Depending on where you are. It's usually along the Appalachian Trail.
Oh, well, along the Appalachian Trail. Yeah. That's exactly where I was.
Yeah.
So you had to stay at the designated, like we had mapped out our mileage.
Unless they fill up.
Unless they fill up. Then you can sleep somewhere else.
And if you're smart, you just sit around and wait for it to fill up because it's going to.
Or you stealth camp.
And then you just camp near it because once it's filled up, you can't sleep there.
Yeah. So you're not supposed to sleep outside the whatever. It was my first trip, and I had no idea what I was doing.
Right.
My backpack weighed 60 pounds.
Yeah.
So I was like, I'm not going to carry this yoga mat if I'm not going to stay in the hammock, because I figured out that you're not supposed to hammock camp. So I left the hammock at the hotel. I left the yoga mat at the hotel. I brought a sleeping bag, and I don't really know what I was thinking, honestly, because I had to sleep somewhere. And I knew I had to sleep in the shelters, but I didn't have any insulation below me.
So in your mind, were you thinking maybe the shelters had like mattresses or something in them, or something soft to sleep on? Or
I don't know what I was thinking. I was probably just young and dumb and not thinking at all.
Well, you were in your early 20s.
Yeah, this is like, what, 4 or 5 years ago?
Yeah, you're like 24, 25 years old.
Yeah. Yeah, maybe I was 23, 24, 25. Brain still wasn't fully developed. No offense to no offense to all the 25-year-old guys out there.
Brain wasn't fully developed. I like that.
It's just now getting to the point where it's fully developed.
That's
I'm
funny,
still an idiot, though. So, anyway, my point is that I didn't have a sleeping pad. So, quickly after that trip, after sleeping on the wood slats of the shelters for multiple nights.
Probably wonderfully comfortable.
Awful. My father-in-law used his boot as his pillow.
Wow.
I think I wadded up a T-shirt. I put on every layer I had. I was cold.
Well,
I had
I had no insulation.
Well, I did have a sleeping bag, but I didn't have anything below me. Yeah. And it was cold. And point is that it's the first thing I bought when I got home was a sleeping pad. But I went on Amazon, and I was like, I don't have a bunch of money to spend on this, and I bought an uninsulated pad that was like $50, and it was like a knockoff X-Lite. And then I went on a trip to Cumberland Falls State Park, and we slept in 40, 45-degree uninsulated
pad.
Yep, on one of those sand beaches along the river.
You froze.
Yeah, it was cold.
Yeah,
so then,
you got the moisture coming off the river. You got no insulation underneath you.
It was cold.
Oh, man.
So long story short, on the pads, I used that one until like the temperature started getting in the 40s, and then I figured out it's cold. So
you need to get a warmer pad.
Then I had to buy a warmer pad.
So what'd you end up getting?
I got an X-Lite, a Neo Air X-Lite, because word on the street was at the time this was the best, the brightest, this is the best value. All the thru hikers are using it, blah blah blah. And this
is what, 2018?
Yeah, this is before COVID. Yeah, definitely. So I used that, and I used it on my thru hike of the Long Trail. And I got the wide version, but I didn't like, and I still don't love, I still don't love the fact that it tapers at the bottom because your feet can fall off.
Right.
And then I was like, well, I need to get me a rectangular pad.
And the Nemo Tensor comes calling.
The Nemo Tensor came calling. I think Dan Becker, he maybe had done a video about it or something. And I was like, I'm going to try this out.
Can I say something interesting?
Yeah, sure.
I wanted to get a Neo Air X-Lite because that's what everybody talked about. That was the one everybody did. I went to J&H Outfitters, which is here in Lexington. And I walked in and asked if they had those. And they said, no, we don't sell those here because nobody would buy them. And I looked at it and I was like, but I thought that was the most popular one. He goes, no, I want you to check out this one. And he showed me the Nemo Tensor, but it was before they did R value. So it was rated to 20 degrees. So it had a temperature rating, which I don't know why we do R value and we don't do temperature rating. That would make a whole lot more sense.
Yeah.
If they had a way of doing an actual temperature rating that was consistent.
Yeah.
I don't know how they do it. I'm not going to worry about it. But I was using the Nemo Tensor about a year before everybody else started using it. And I remember like, I think Dan put it in one of his videos. I was like, I did that before Dan.
Check mark that one off the list.
That one's all mine. That one's all mine. That's a fantastic sleeping pad, by the way.
Yeah, it's a good pad. It's comfortable. And a little pro tip: let a little air out. Don't air it up. You can air it up all the way, and then whenever you lay on it.
But that doesn't give you any of the comfort of having a mattress because it's so firm. You might as well have slept on the ground.
Well, usually what I do is I air it up all the way as maximum as I can.
Right.
And then whenever I'm ready to lay down and go to sleep, it's gotten cold. The ground has gotten colder, so I have to air it up a little more. And then I'll get on it, and it's rock solid hard.
Yeah.
And I want it to be kind of cushiony, so you can lay on it and kind of hit the button and adjust it to whatever your liking is.
Absolutely.
On your softness level. But don't make it too soft, because then whenever you roll over, your hip will touch the ground.
Now, I am rolling with a brand new pad this year.
What's your pad?
I got the Big Agnes Rapide SL.
Oh, nice.
It's about the same weight, maybe a little bit less than the Nemo.
Uh-huh.
But it has a 4.2 rating.
Now, do you know how that R value works? I mean, I know that the higher the R value, the warmer it's going to be.
Yeah, exactly. The higher the R value, the warmer the pad's going to be. I would also say that it's I'm trying to think of this way to put this. It's more fluid than it needs to be, because you've got companies out there like Climate and others that are using R value, but it isn't necessarily always equal to the R value of the same R value as another pad. Sea to Summit has the big black Alpine version of their pad, and Dan did a video on that and said it was one of the most cold pads he'd ever slept on. Had cold, and it gets down about the size of a large sleeping bag. That's how big this thing is.
Why was it
and
cold?
It's heavy, but Dan couldn't stay warm with the pad. And so like it's like we were saying, we've talked about the sleeping pad value or sleeping bag values and your quilt values. How like they'll say it's a 30-degree quilt, but the comfort rating is like 45.
Yeah.
Or in a sleeping bag, it's a 0-degree sleeping bag, but really the comfort rating is 20.
Right.
You know, there's some fluidity to this stuff. Even though they say the R value is this, they can tell you all they want that there's a standard, but you can't really trust that.
Yeah, I don't know how whenever you get insulation sprayed into your attic.
Yeah.
And they would tell you the R value. And, you can look and see how many inches thick that foam has to be or whatever.
Right.
The roll insulation. We have consistency there. And it's the same. It should be standard. And you have people that literally, come in and check it, make sure it's up to code, et cetera, in the housing market.
Right.
But in backpacking, it seems like it's kind of like, if you ride a motorcycle, they have different ratings.
Yeah.
And, it might be Snell approved, or it might only be DOT approved. And like with DOT testing, you work with the Department of Transportation, they give you these standards, and then you self-test it.
Yeah.
And then you're like, well, it meets the standards, and then you pay the Department of Transportation however much it costs to have the sticker to be able to put on there.
And there's a tip here with this. If you're testing out sleeping pads, sleeping bags, quilts, things like that, and you don't know for sure that those ratings are what they should be, buy from a place like REI where you have a year to use it, and you can take it back and get your money back.
Yeah.
And you can test out different pads and find out which one really is what you need. Like, don't listen to yahoos like us for everything.
Yeah.
Like, we can only tell you our experience with stuff.
Yeah.
But I sleep warm. So for me, I don't need an R value of 6 to sleep warm in cold weather because I sleep warm. Whereas Jeremiah, he gets cold when it's like 50 degrees out.
Yeah.
And so like he may need a pad that's like a 6 where I would only need a 4. And so you kind of need to, the big thing is don't trust anybody. I know it sounds terrible to say, but you can't trust any of the ratings. Like you need to really go out and try them first. You can watch YouTube reviews from guys like us and others, but the truth is we can only tell you what works for us. And when we test something, we're not testing it over like 50 other people. We're testing it over, Jeremiah's testing for his channel, for what his experience is. I'm testing for mine. When we talk on this podcast, it's our personal experiences. When we have guests on, it's their personal experiences. You got to try stuff out, and do it in a place where you can return it.
Yeah,
with
I totally
no penalty.
agree.
With no penalty.
Let me tell you about my experience with the winter tarp camping.
Do that.
So, me and Hunter Strip, which we've had on here in the past, me and him went and done a little section of the Sheltoe, and I tried to go the lightest base weight I possibly could.
Well, I remember this.
And I think that everything totaled out like under 17 pounds with multiple days of food, 2 liters of water, my sleep backpack, everything added together, fuel, all of it was 17 pounds. So that wasn't my base weight. That was like my overall, let's start hiking.
That's awesome. That's really good.
That is unheard of for me.
Yeah.
So the second or third night or however long it was, we had to camp at Holly Bay campground.
Yep.
But it's wintertime. And in Kentucky, all the campgrounds and stuff close at like October the 31st maybe, or I don't know. Feel like it's very, very early in the season. Some of them it's like October the 1st.
Yeah.
So, that's like peak foliage. I wish they weren't closing so early, but the campground was closed. And we just camped there. The gates were locked and everything, but we come in on foot.
Yeah.
So we camped there, and I set up my tarp between like 2 poles that are used for like a lantern.
Yeah.
And or maybe a tree and something. But I set up on a gravel tent pad.
Yeah.
And I put down like a piece of polycrow, and that was my winter shelter. And I got to tell you, hunters, what I did was just use my tarp that I hammock camp with.
Right.
Which is not actually like a tarp setup. You can do it.
Yeah.
But he had like a full-on like mesh inner that he set up that you crawl in, and he had a tarp that went over it.
He had a bivvy. Yeah, he had a bivvy that he put a tarp over, right?
I don't know. But his tarp camping was much more elaborate than mine. I guarantee you stayed warmer, but I felt like I was so exposed. But I know that Goat, he does this tarp camping. He'll take a tarp. Of course, he's a little bit wild. He done like you can only use technology. What was it, from like 1800s and before?
Yeah.
Where he lived like that for a while.
Yeah.
So he probably knows his way around the tarp setups and all that. But that is another alternative that you can use in the wintertime. You're going to be a little bit more exposed, or at least I was, with the tarp camping. But what you could do is bring your winter gear, and your shelter system is a tarp, and then you shed the extra weight that you're not having to use.
Right.
But I felt like I was a little bit more exposed.
Yeah.
But you could bring a bigger sleeping bag, like a heavier sleeping bag that's warmer. You could bring a higher rated R value pad.
Yep.
And do it that way.
Well, and I'm going to say this. I'm going to end with this.
Okay.
I want to end with this statement. Winter camping is all about what you can tolerate.
That's true.
That's really what it is. Like, winter camping is all about what you can tolerate. If you can tolerate not sleeping real warm and you're fine, go do it. Don't worry about all this crap we've been talking about. Do your own thing. Take a lower rated R value pad. Sleep under a tarp instead of using insulation. Do whatever you want to do. But if you're somebody like Jeremiah who hates the cold and does not stay warm in the cold, you can't do that because you can't tolerate as much. So it's all about what you can tolerate. And really, that's what backpacking is in general. Yeah. How much suck can you tolerate on a trip? So that's our advice for today. And that's what we're going to tell you. Basically, we told you nothing. I'm kidding.
Get used to it.
Hopefully this was helpful, though, that we maybe gave you some ideas that you can use if you want to go out and do some winter backpacking. Make sure you let your friends know about the Backpacking Podcast. And while you're at it, we never say this. Why don't you give us a really nice rating on Apple Podcasts and on Spotify so that when people look up the podcast, they think, I want to listen to those 2 morons talk about stuff they have no clue about. So
that's fun, man.
So with that said, for myself and Jeremiah, we'll catch you on the next one.
Adios, folks.